Welcome, my friends, to a low-budget, no-frills battle report shot in the ruins of the old hammered wargaming studio. I suppose you could call this my humble attempt to thank all of you out there who provided us with support and encouragement over the last couple of weeks. It has certainly raised our spirits, and we greatly, greatly appreciate it. In today's episode, a band of orc bounty hunters has infiltrated the tiny bandit enclave of El Rey, searching for a cadre of notorious outlaws and self-described revolutionaries. To play today's solo game, I will be using the Space Weirdos Sci-Fi Wargaming rules, because let's face it, most space opera stories are just futuristic westerns anyway. Here is the famous, or perhaps infamous, Colonel Vasquez and his band of outlaw revolutionaries, which includes 2 hand-to-hand specialists. So the Colonel only has 2 shooters on his team, including himself, but perhaps that won't matter much amidst the tightly clustered buildings of El Rey. This warband's trait is Plucky Rebels, which means once per round they can reroll a single die result of 1, if I remember. Colonel Vasquez has a heavy pistol and a melee weapon, plus a targeting reticule, which represents a custom sight on his revolver, plus he is a tactician, giving him a +1 die type to initiative rolls. The Invisible Swordsman, anyone remember the 3 amigos, is a deadly hand-to-hand fighter with a prowess of 2d10, but he has no shooting ability at all. He does, however, have a stealth suit, which means if the Invisible Swordsman is touching terrain, enemy models outside of 1 stick can't draw a line of sight to him. Gatling is the definition of a glass cannon. He has high firepower, he's rocking an autocannon, he has a targeting reticule, but he has no hand weapon, so he's unarmed in close combat, and he has a low defense. The Brute is a steam-powered cyborg with clippers for hands, but no shooting ability. He has high prowess, powered weapons, and the equivalent of extra limbs, which means he can attack up to 3 times in a turn. The Orc Bounty Hunters are led by Big Irving there on the left, and their warband trait is Gunfighters, which means that their heavy pistols and heavy rifles can shoot up to 3 times a turn if they have the actions to do so. Also, the Orcs are Bounty Hunters, which means if one of them is adjacent to a downed or staggered enemy, that orc can dispatch that enemy by taking a use action, and the warband can do that once per round. Big Irving himself has a high firepower attribute. He's armed with a heavy pistol, a melee weapon, and 2 sticks of dynamite. Buckshot is armed with a shotgun and a melee weapon, and a shotgun is much more effective at close range than longer range, so he wants to get within 1 stick if possible. We're saying that Ringo's 2 pistols are the equivalent of an energy pistol, which makes him a little bit more accurate. He also has a melee weapon. And finally, Deadeye is armed with a heavy rifle and a melee weapon, and because of the gunfighter trait, if he has the actions to do so, he can shoot that heavy rifle up to 3 times. Okay, so the orcs are approaching from the west side of town with the intent of killing Colonel Vasquez and his entire crew. While the colonel and his band are moving in from the east, and their goal is to eliminate every bounty hunter on the table. So it looks like we have the makings of a bloody skirmish on the dusty streets of El Rey. The Colonel's band will roll initiative with D8s because he has Tactician, and both teams will also get 2 command points to spend on things like Dodge, Overwatch, Power Up, and stuff like that. Alright, let's roll some initiative and get this low-budget western underway. As I said, Colonel Vasquez rolls 2 D8s for initiative because he has Tactician, and his revolutionaries win the initiative roll. They choose to activate Gatling, the glass cannon, who uses 2 actions to ascend to this rooftop and get into a good firing position to kind of cover the streets, but since he doesn't have a target yet, that's all he's going to do right now. On the Bounty Hunter's activation, Deadeye the Rifleman ascends to another rooftop on the opposite side of the enclave, gaining 2 movement tokens in the process, which will reduce his shooting ability. Nonetheless, he'll take a single shot across the rooftops and try to hit Gatling, who moved twice and also is going to benefit from some cover. The Orc Bounty Hunter rolls green dice, of course, but unfortunately his shot misses. He'll have much better odds if he's not shooting on the run. Next, the Invisible Swordsman confidently saunters into town wearing his mystic cloak of concealment. If he's touching terrain, enemies outside of 1 stick can't draw a line of sight on him. And he moves up to 3 sticks in a turn, so he's pretty darn speedy, though he doesn't have any shooting. So there's the Invisible Swordsman right there. He's well concealed and looking forward to slicing and dicing some bounty hunters. On the Orc's activation, Buckshot tentatively moves up, hoping that Gatling on the rooftop across town doesn't spend a command point to Overwatch and take a shot at him. Gatling might actually like to do that, but unfortunately he can't quite see Buckshot from his vantage point. So Buckshot is free to continue moving up toward the stable, which puts him right about there. Next, Colonel Vasquez decides to make a bold move. He spends a command point to increase his speed by 1, ascending to the roof of the tallest building in the bandit sanctuary known as El Rey. From there, he'll be in a good position to shoot any pesky orcs who enter the center of town, but unfortunately his pistol is less effective at ranges beyond 1 stick. Upon seeing Colonel Vasquez pop up on a nearby second-floor roof, Deadeye decides to spend a command point and overwatch, so he's going to take a pot shot at the Colonel. However, because the Colonel has 3 movement tokens and cover, he'll be defending with D12s. While poor Deadeye is shooting with D6s, and of course he missed. 15-7. Now it's the Orc Bounty Hunter's activation again. Big Irving himself rounds the corner and fires his heavy pistol twice at Colonel Vasquez. The shots are difficult, however, because Colonel Vasquez has 3 movement tokens, is behind cover, and Big Irving is shooting a pistol beyond the range of 1 stick, so both of his shots miss. The second one not by much, though. On the Revolutionary's activation, the steam-powered brute marches into town, snipping his snippers for dramatic effect, and he ends up over by his pal, the Invisible Swordsman, who is another hand-to-hand specialist. So there's the brute, and he has 2 movement tokens now. On the Orc's activation, Ringo spends 2 movement actions to climb to the roof, then shoots across the Enclave at Gatling the glass cannon. Ringo's going to spend a command point to buff his shot, and Gatling is going to spend a command point to boost his defense, which is already buffed by movement and cover. Gatling easily avoids the shot. Thus ends turn 1, bullets are flying, but no blood has been spilled. Heading into turn 2, it's time to roll for initiative once again. And once again the Orcs lose, but not by much. So on the Bandit Revolutionary's activation, Gatling is going to take a shot at Deadeye. However, because he knows Gatling can shoot 3 times his activation, Deadeye decides to spend a command point and drop down 1 stick, taking him out of sight and costing Gatling an action. With his original target now out of sight, Gatling decides to shoot at Ringo instead. Even if he wanted to, Ringo can't dodge because each team can only use dodge once per turn. Gatling hits Ringo with a shot and then rolls a 5 on the underfire table, forcing Ringo to run for cover. So Ringo drops down out of sight, depriving Gatling of his last visible target. So that ends Gatling's activation, and now the Orcs get to activate. Deadeye, the rifleman who just spent a command point to drop to the ground, decides he's going to round the corner and shoot up at Colonel Vasquez. And since Deadeye is armed with a rifle, he doesn't have a pesky penalty for shooting at that range. However, the Colonel is going to spend a command point to dodge. He still has his cover, but he doesn't have his 3 movement tokens from last turn, so he doesn't want to get shot, so he's just going to drop down to the roof below. So Deadeye loses that shoot action, so instead he's going to move 1 stick up near Buckshot by the stable. And that will give him 2 movement tokens. Now it's the Revolutionary's activation again, and the steam-powered brute stomps forward 2 sticks. It's kind of a risky move, but he wants to get in the thick of things and start severing some limbs. So there's the brute with 2 movement tokens, and he's very close to Buckshot and Deadeye. So on his activation, Buckshot is just going to kind of step out into the street and fire at the brute with his scattergun. This is primo shotgun range, so Buckshot has no excuses. However, because of his movement tokens, the brute gets a buff on his defense, and that is enough to avoid the shotgun blast. On his activation, the Invisible Swordsman is going to take 3 movement actions. He can take 3 and get into close combat with Deadeye. So the Invisible Swordsman cannot attack this round because he used all 3 of his actions, but he does kind of lock Deadeye into close combat. Deadeye will have to spend 2 actions on his own activation if he wants to disengage. But what he can do right now is spend a command point to overwatch and try to shoot the Invisible Swordsman as he's rushing up, so he's going to try to do that. Unfortunately, Deadeye is not successful. The Invisible Swordsman has 3 movement tokens, so his defense is kind of high right now. On the Orc's activation, Big Irving decides to move up 2 sticks, putting him adjacent to the same building that Colonel Vasquez is adjacent to. Prompting Colonel Vasquez to activate next, climb up to the roof of the building, move over to the edge of the roof, and then attempt to shoot Big Irving through the top of his hat. So that's a dirty trick. He misses though, probably because the target and the shooter both move 2 sticks. And finally, the last combatant to move this turn is Ringo, who decides to hop onto the roof and take a shot at the Colonel, but because of range, movement, and cover, it's going to be a tricky shot at best. Ringo misses, but it was a long shot anyway. So that is the end of a bloodless turn 2, but I doubt that trend will hold as we head into turn 3. As our bounty hunters and revolutionaries are out in the open now. Surprisingly, the orcs win initiative, so they will be activating first. Lighting a stick of dynamite with his cigar, Big Irving moves menacingly toward Gatling, who prudently decides to spend a command point and overwatch once Big Irving rounds the corner. Unfortunately, Gatling misses even though he was rolling d10s versus the orcs' d8s. So that's a missed opportunity. So Big Irving moves up and calculates where he wants the dynamite to go. He can throw it up to 1 stick and it'll have a 1/2 stick blast radius. He'd like it to land right about there, and since dynamite is a piece of equipment, it requires 2 actions to use it. So Big Irving lobs a stick of dynamite, and Gatling, because he's kind of a wimp, spends a command point to dodge it. Now here's where I made a mistake. You can dodge a shoot action, but you can't dodge a use item action, which is what this is. So Gatling got away with something here. On the Revolutionary's turn, the Brute moves in on Buckshot, eager to get into hand-to-hand. Buckshot is less eager, so he's going to spend a command point to overwatch. He's going to try to chop the Brute down before he has to come to grips with those steam-powered clippers. Buckshot hits the Brute at point-blank range. Amazing! Rolling on the underfire table and adding his range bonus, Buckshot forces the Brute to dive for cover. Presumably, Buckshot shoots the Brute before he gets into base-to-base. That's the wise thing to do. So the behemoth moves away 1 stick and then falls over. It's not the kill shot that the orc was looking for, but it does save him from being chopped to pieces in close combat. The Brute still has 2 actions, however, so he stands back up and continues stomping toward Buckshot, not quite reaching him this time. He's pretty relentless, though. Which is why Buckshot is going to formally activate and shoot the Brute. He gets 2 shots with his shotgun, and he hopes that does the job. The first shot is a miss, but the second shot hits by a single point, killing the Brute, so Buckshot scores first blood, which is really, really lucky for the orc because he would not have survived close combat with the Brute. Now the bandit revolutionaries get to activate, and Gatling is going to move up and unleash hell on Buckshot. We're going to give Buckshot a little cover, though, because he's kind of protected by the corner of that building. The first shot misses, but the second shot hits, knocking Buckshot to the ground. So Buckshot falls over. The bullet must have grazed his thick, orky skull. Over by the stable, Deadeye finds himself in base-to-base contact with the invisible swordsman, which is not what the rifleman wants, so he spends 2 actions to disengage, and then he's going to shoot. More than doubling the swordsman's defense roll, which gives Deadeye a +1 on the under-fire table. And the invisible swordsman is staggered. So he'll need to become unstaggered on his next activation before he can do anything. So he might as well do that now, and the invisible swordsman does succeed in becoming unstaggered. Now he has 2 more actions left in his activation. So he's going to move up and say hello to Buckshot, who's lying on the ground, and attack him in close combat because that's what the invisible swordsman does. Poor Buckshot is at a disadvantage because he's lying on the ground, and as a result, the invisible swordsman gets more than double his score, giving the swordsman a +1 on the under attack table, which unfortunately is enough to dispatch Buckshot. So that's the end of the orc shotgunner. He was stabbed while lying in the dirt. Seeing that, Ringo is going to move to the edge of the roof and shoot twice at the dastardly invisible swordsman, who is not currently adjacent to terrain, so no invisibility for him right now. Unfortunately, however, Ringo shoots twice and misses twice. So that's his activation. And finally, Colonel Vasquez is going to shoot down at Big Irving, a couple of shots, though Big Irving will spend a command point to buff his defense, which will help with the first one. So the first roll is a tie, so that counts as a miss. And on the second roll, Big Irving wins, even though he doesn't have the defense buff. So I believe that's all the activations for turn 3, though I think the body count is probably going to escalate in turn 4. Let's find out. Okay, at the top of turn 4, it's time to roll for initiative. And the orcs win again, even though they're rolling d6s versus the bandits d8s. So Big Irving could try to throw dynamite again, but I think he's going to shoot because as a gunfighter, he can shoot 3 times with his heavy pistol. He'll start by trying to shoot at Gatling because Gatling is kind of squishy, though Gatling will probably dodge, spending a precious command point to move outside of Big Irving's line of sight. So Gatling is moving back. So that means Irving has 2 actions left, and I think he's going to use both of them to shoot at the Colonel. Now, all game, the orcs have been using green dice, but for this exchange, in my head, I felt like Irving was using the red dice, so that's the way I played it, and Irving ended up missing twice. Now, had he been rolling his lucky green dice, maybe the results would have been the same, maybe they would have been different. Who knows? Next, the Invisible Swordsman rushes Deadeye, who's going to overwatch. Unfortunately, Deadeye misses 11 to 13. Now the Invisible Swordsman can make up to 2 attacks if he so chooses. The first attack hits, so now the Invisible Swordsman rolls on the under attack table. And a 4 is defensive strike, so Deadeye gets to hit back. Unfortunately, Deadeye rolls a measly 2, which does nothing, so the Invisible Swordsman attacks again, defeating Deadeye's defense roll, and so the Invisible Swordsman rolls on the under attack table once again. I think 6 is actually knockback, but I played it as breakaway, which means Deadeye moves away 1 stick. Now with knockback, he would have moved 1 stick and fallen over, though it's easy enough just to spend 1 action on his activation and stand up. Anyway, Deadeye is going to shoot at the Invisible Swordsman. His first shot misses, but he can shoot again. That's a hit, so now Deadeye rolls on the under fire table, adding 1 for his heavy rifle, and that is a 9, down and staggered. So the Invisible Swordsman is down and staggered. On his activation, Gatling is going to move to the edge of the roof so he can level his primitive autocannon down at Big Irving on ground level. And Gatling can fire twice if he so chooses. Gatling rolls a 13 versus Big Irving's 5, so that's more than double, so Gatling will get a +1 on the under fire table. 11 is out of action, so that is the end of Big Irving. Gunned down in the dusty streets of El Rey. Now Gatling still has another shot, so he's going to take his second shot all the way across the table at Ringo. And it's a hit, so Gatling rolls on the under fire table. 9, Ringo is down and staggered. So Ringo will have to try to become unstaggered and then stand up on his next activation. So he might as well do that now. Ringo becomes unstaggered. Then Ringo stands up and takes a shot at the Invisible Swordsman who's lying in the dirt. Ringo beats the defense roll by more than 2 to 1, so he'll be rolling with a +1 on the under fire table. 9 is down and staggered, and a second staggered token means that the Invisible Swordsman is now out of action. And for the final activation of turn 4, Colonel Vasquez is going to shoot at Ringo. But Ringo is going to spend a command point to dodge. He's a survivor. Ringo drops down from the roof, which means the Colonel will have to pick a different target, whose name is Deadeye. Sorry, Deadeye. Using his last command point to power up, the Colonel rolls d10s and gets more than twice Deadeye's defense roll. Then Colonel Vasquez rolls on the under fire table with a +1, gets a total of 12, and guns down Deadeye. So Deadeye the Rifleman is killed by a long-range pistol shot. So I'm going to say that's the game, since the only bounty hunter still standing is Ringo, the master of self-preservation. Now Ringo knows the bullet that killed Deadeye was really meant for him, so he slinks out of town. His pride is wounded, but he'll live to fight another day. As will Colonel Vasquez and Gatling, who successfully defended their bandit sanctuary. Unlike Deadeye, Irving, the Brute, the Invisible Swordsman, and Buckshot, who are all buried in the local version of Boot Hill. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed this no-frills, low-budget game of Wild West Weirdos using the Space Weirdos rules from Garske Games. Until next time, take care of yourselves and watch out for those bounty hunters.